Welcome. I've been given instructions about this microphone, so if you can't hear, just tell me. I'm Jane Moss. I'm the Artistic Director of Lincoln Center, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this discussion about the remarkable, astonishing St. Matthew Passion, which opens our White Light Festival Tuesday night. With the Berlin Philharmonic, with the Berlin Radio Choir, with Peter Sellars directing, and it is an astonishing experience. We had a wonderful dress rehearsal on Saturday. I don't know if any of you were there, and it is truly a transporting experience, and we're thrilled and delighted you're here, because it probably also means you have tickets to see it, which is wonderful.
Are people able to see it? No.
Yeah, is anybody? Oh, so you just want to hear about it. Oh, good. It is an unbelievably remarkable experience. And for me, it's so personal because it premiered in Berlin in 2010. And shortly thereafter, I met with Martin Hoffmann, who's the director of the Berlin Philharmonic, and said with just complete blind faith that we wanted to bring it to New York. And somehow we got it here, and somehow in all of these discussions and all these permutations, and we're doing it at the Park Avenue Armory, we have sort of recreated the Berlin Philharmonie, the Berlin Philharmonic's concert hall in the Park Avenue Armory. And I don't know if it actually occurred to me that it was all actually going to happen, but it is happening, and it is a remarkable experience for New York. So I'm thrilled that you're coming and that you're here. These two, I think I actually am only going to have one question because the two of them are going to take over, which is to my right is Simon Halsey, who is the director of the Berlin Radio Choir. He is also director of the City of Birmingham Orchestra Choir. He is also director of the London Symphony Orchestra Choir. He's also director of the BBC Proms Youth Choir, and he is the most extraordinary choral director in the world today. So, and his work on this production is incredible inspiration. To his right is a man who needs no introduction to New York, Peter Sellars. Peter, do you mind if I don't go through all of your awards and all of your productions?
No. Move on.
These are two co-conspirators on the St. Matthew Passion. There is a third co-conspirator, which is Simon Rattle, who couldn't be with us tonight because he's conducting at Carnegie Hall. So he had a very good reason, but he sends his regards. My first question, which is probably also going to be my last question, my first question is to Simon Halsey. I thought it'd be useful if he could just talk a little bit about the St. Matthew Passion. In terms, it is such an iconic work in the choral repertoire. It is, and I'm just curious as to your perception, and not only in the choral repertoire, in the Berlin Radio Choir's repertoire, in all of our lives, it is such an iconic work. And what are those features that have turned it into sort of a kind of Sistine Chapel of the classical repertoire?
Well, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here, a great privilege to be here. The St. Matthew Passion. Well, I've known it all my life. My dad was a conductor, and I remember him preparing it in his music room when I was very young. I can remember sitting through performances of it that got lost in St. Paul's Cathedral in London with its 10-second echo, which my brother was singing in the choir of and going to sleep when I was a very small boy. Little did I think that I would later do so many performances of it and be so involved in it. But the curious thing about it is that by a sort of curious accident, I finished up in the world of training choirs to sing with symphony orchestras. As Jane already said, the City of Birmingham Symphony, the London Symphony, and the Berlin Philharmonic. And because of the generation that we belong to, that repertoire had fallen out of the symphonic repertoire because when I was a student, of course, the early music orchestras were getting going, and the very first work I ever did coming out of university was assisting people like John Eliot Gardiner and Roger Norrington and Christopher Hogwood and so on, doing, if you like, the old music revivals of that music, which Simon Rattle was also very much watching from the sidelines, though not necessarily taking part in at that point. And then later on, both Simon and I think Peter as well, thought, wait a minute, we need to get this repertoire back because for the symphony orchestras and by extension for the symphonic choruses that sing this repertoire, we were discovering that our repertoire really began with the Mozart Requiem and came through to the present day. And we'd lost a century of repertoire that we wanted to get back. Now, you would imagine that when Peter and I got together, that in Berlin to talk about what we might like to do, that one of the great icons of the German-speaking choral culture might be the obvious thing to do for one of the great professional choirs of Germany. Perhaps I should just explain who the Berlin Radio Choir are. They are about to be 90 years old. Very few of them are founder members. And they therefore began in a united Berlin, finished up in East Berlin, came back through the wall into a united Germany again. My co-conspirator running the choir, Hans Rehberg, is here to my left. He sang tenor in the choir for many years, and when the Berlin Wall came down, he led a whole load of them through the wall on those first days, almost exactly 25 years ago. And this great choir, they turned up at the Philharmonie in Berlin, and with Hans, they said to Bernstein, excuse me, we're here. We've just come through a hole in the wall. Could we sing with you? And they are on the iconic Freiheit Beethoven 9. If you go back and look at your recording, the choir that you're hearing tomorrow or the night after that were there on that great historic night. Since then, we've been finding our place in a united Germany. There is no necessity for the choir to be associated with the Berlin Philharmonic, but by great good fortune, Simon and I bumped into each other 34 years ago and have been working with each other ever since. And therefore, again, through Hans Rehberg's great vision, if you like, Hans hired me to become the chief conductor of the Berlin Radio Choir before anyone had thought of hiring Simon Rattle to go to the Berlin Philharmonic. About 2 weeks later, the Berlin Philharmonic hired Simon Rattle, and hey, lo and behold, the Berlin Radio Choir began to sing with the Berlin Philharmonic. And although there is no formal identification between the two groups, we do about 40 or 45% of the choir's work is with the Philharmonic. And it's a very remarkable organization because it's something that we don't really have here in the English-speaking world. It is a full-time professional chorus. 63 singers who have salaried positions for their whole lives to sing and to do about 55 different productions in the year. And of course we have professional choirs here, and great ones, but it works a bit, from that point of view, a little bit like an opera chorus. They're salaried, like the Met Chorus, but they're there to do choral works. And so the first thing we encountered Peter on, and I'll hand over to him in a second, was we did John Adams' A Flowering Tree, which I would have thought was our sort of repertoire, because one of the things we're supposed to do is contemporary music. But the choir had never done any John Adams before, so they begged him. They said to him, Peter, next time we work together, can we do something from our repertoire? So Peter and I decided the St. Matthew Passion was the obvious thing to do. But remember, I began this by saying that the choir had not in the last 25 years sung any Bach because they're basically a symphonic choir. It had passed out of their repertoire. And meanwhile, it had passed out of the Berlin Philharmonic's repertoire as well. So the decision to do the St. Matthew Passion with the Berlin Philharmonic and the Berlin Radio Choir was at least, at the beginning, eccentric. And I pass it over to Peter.
Simon, in America, we call eccentric innovative.
So do we. I was just trying to be stimulating.
Simon does not get off that easily. Actually, again, the Matthew Passion is something we've grown up with, and it is a kind of musical Everest. It is something that's beyond your grasp permanently. And the most ambitious piece of music imaginable that any composer ever wrote. just, there are more than 80 numbers. It's everything from a trio sonata to double choirs, double orchestras, huge sound, huge landscape, and then back into something utterly personal of one person singing quietly with an organ and a cello. And this incredible scope of composition all the way in between. It was bizarre. We were at the end of the performances of John Adams' Flowering Tree. The chorus had a horrible time singing that music. It was written for the Venezuelan chorus of the Schola Cantorum, and the rhythms were just not very German. And
Though we did manage in the end.
And there we were backstage after the last performance, and nobody wanted to leave. Everyone said, we really actually did have a wonderful time. What could we do? And that was my first experience in the Philharmonie Hall, which is 360 degrees, as you probably know. And that's really extraordinary because the Bach Matthew Passion is not written for proscenium. And when it is performed with everyone facing the same direction, it's not what that music is about. Because the music is not presenting those words to an audience. Bach wrote this piece as a community having a conversation with itself. Not pointed outward to an audience, but in fact, two choruses singing to each other. Two orchestras playing for each other. The soloists actually asking questions of the instrumentalists, and the instrumentalists asking questions back. The piece was the original definition of interactive. It was this idea that the only way we can understand this material of that sacrifice, that level of injustice that reaches the crucifixion, somehow being also liberating. The only way we can understand that is with each other, because nobody is playing with a full deck. And you really need to ask the person next to you, wait a minute, what do you think about this? And the piece is really falsified when it's performed as a statement and not as a dialogue. And the 360 degrees created the space for a dialogue with audience all around. And as Simon said, the shock was, we thought, okay, this will be part of the repertoire. The Berlin Philharmonic and the Berlin Radio Choir both grew up with this music in their childhood, and nobody in the room had performed it in their lifetime.
And that was the most important thing, because nobody came to it with any preconceptions. You see, one of the extraordinary things is that had we done it with, and I do not criticize for 1 second, one of the great early music choirs, one of the great early music orchestras, they'd have done it 50 times before. They'd know how it went. And the great thing with this, everyone just came to it because they were just so thrilled to do it. And therefore, it was theoretically, at least musically, very easy to start from nowhere. On the other hand, what Peter was going to ask them to do was going to challenge people out of their normal comfort zone. And since he will not tell you about how challenging he is, probably, can I do so?
Can I just preface this by one observation, in case you're not aware? This will feel like a fully staged production. So we don't have a choir, reading the music. It is really a fully staged production, because that leads into what you were going to say about the challenges of doing this.
So if you're a normal full-time professional chorus and you give a different performance, Beethoven 9 one week and the Bruckner Mass the next and the Flowering Tree the next, you're not used to learning pieces off by heart. And so that was the first thing, we had to learn it off by heart. Well, that took 3 weeks. Then we did something extraordinary that we'd never done with anyone before. Now, bear in mind, we work with all the world's greatest conductors who ask a lot of great questions, and every week is really deeply stimulating. He came, and we just sat there for a week, and we explored what it was about from beginning to end. And we began to move. Now, no one was against moving, but we hadn't, concert choirs don't do that. So we had to do quite a lot of loosening up and taking risks with each other and going into the real meanings of it. And this required people to start thinking about their work in a new way. And this was extremely stimulating. And I would just like to say how grateful I am to Peter, because since then we've done something similar with Peter, a staging of the St. John Passion. And later on, when we came to that 2 or 3 years later, the very first rehearsal was a sold-out rehearsal. Can you imagine? The first rehearsal was sold to the public. And if I may lay on the floor in my new suit. He came into the rehearsal room, there were 500 people, and he just said to the choir, okay, lie on the floor, and they all just did. And he said, start twitching and rolling about. And they did, and 500 people watched, and I thought, we've come a long way from the first day, when 2 years ago, he said, okay, let's stand up, and they went. So, and subsequently, through this, we have also got an astonishing performance of the Brahms Requiem that we do.
Which we're bringing in 2016.
Which we're bringing to you subsequently as well. And so suddenly, the whole definition of what choir music is changed. And I'll hand back to him.
Not so easy. Again, one of the great things is you have to do pioneering work with pioneering people. It's a waste of time to do it with people who are resistant, want to go back to the old thing. Can you imagine working next to this guy, right? You get his energy. His energy is absolutely unquenchable, and his aliveness to the moment is unquenchable. What we did for those first 2 weeks of rehearsal, really, was go through every single word in every chorale. These chorales are so often performed as going through motions, a kind of with a certain, of course, type of reverence, but basically it's someone else's gesture that you are making. For me, the most important thing with the Matthew Passion, with any sacred material, is that it's personal. It's not corporate. This is not a message from our sponsor. This is a message from your heart. This is a message from the things you care about, the things you don't understand, the things you're questioning in your life, the walls you have come up against, and then searching for some ray of light. And that's what this material is. And I needed each person in the chorus to feel each word, not agree upon each word, but to feel each word personally. That they were singing something that they could actually sing honestly. Not because they were obedient children obeying orders, but you're actually hearing something they feel or think or wonder about.
And something much more remarkable than that happened, because in addition to that, what happened in the rehearsals? So you then bring in Simon Rattle, and it's getting pretty exciting. And what happened was that nobody could agree how to do any of the pieces. So we went through every single word of these chorales. So it's like spending 2 or 3 hours dissecting the hymn you're about to sing. And everyone thought about it. And Simon would say, well, it's clear that this number is fast, angry, and loud. And Peter would say, well, hang on a second. He said, I think it's probably slow, miserable, and very quiet. And the choir would go there going, okay, so what do you want us to do? And I do very clearly remember them both turning to the choir and saying, well, there are the possibilities, now do something with it. And actually, it's less stupid than it sounds, because what was being required was of every player and every singer to take a personal responsibility for it. And that is why this has become so incredibly important to us. I hope it's important to you when you see it tomorrow and the day after. But for us, it is the most remarkable journey we've ever been on, partly because we've been allowed to repeat it on and off over a 4-year period, and for this relationship to deepen and grow, and for us to change our minds as we go along. And what happened to start off with was the group mentality of the orchestra and the group mentality of the choir meant that they all basically did the same thing at more or less the same time. And then the most wonderful anarchy began to set in because, as Peter says, everyone feels differently about the crucifixion of our Lord and what that means to us. And so, yes, they're supposed to fix on the cross, which may be up there in their minds, but actually what Peter allows them to do is take a personal journey to that point, so you don't see them all going, look left, look right, or anything like that. And it becomes more and more extraordinary, because if you look, and may I ask you to do this, as you watch it tomorrow, because you will be very close to it, the way it's been built by these remarkable people, and you will be seeing the faces of every player and every singer. You will see, just fixate on someone there or someone there, and you will see a completely different experience happening. And we get to a stage of, honestly, I'm so moved by it often, I really have to detach myself from it, particularly in the second part, where one is drawn into it. We did it at the Proms the other day in London, which, as you know, the Royal Albert Hall seats over 5,000 people. By the end of the piece, it felt as if the Royal Albert Hall was smaller than this room. Everybody was right there, standing by the cross. There was total silence in the room. There wasn't a cough for the last half an hour. It was just quite remarkable. And that is something that Peter has led us in so extraordinarily strongly. There is a note I had to write about it for the Proms, and I said that actually at the first rehearsal, once we'd explored for 2 weeks the meaning of the text, and he just said, let's begin to move, and people began to move with these ideas, these pictures in their heads, which is actually exactly what musicians constantly should have, but often don't have time to create. I realized that we must be doing something right, because actually quite a lot of people were simply helplessly crying in the first rehearsal, in a good way.
Oh, no, I mean, that first rehearsal, literally, I didn't do any staging. I just told them the story and said, try it. And again, Bach's genius is to create this incredible listening. And what you're feeling and what you're getting all night is Orchestra 1 plays half the night. And the rest of the night, they listen to Orchestra 2. Orchestra 2 plays half the night. And the rest of the night, they listen to Orchestra 1. Chorus 1 spends the night listening to Chorus 2. And listening becomes one of the most active experiences of the work. And when you're a performer, mostly you know your part and just go out there and do it. And Bach sets up this other thing where your part is about listening. And what happened that first time we moved is literally chorus, the opening chorus of the Matthew Passion is Bach setting up grieving. All of these people had their lives changed by this man, Jesus. They were healed. They shook their drug habit. They reunited with their families. All of these broken human beings found themselves somehow whole by being with this man. And it was a small movement in little villages and strange byways. And then it started to build. And 10 days before they entered Jerusalem, the capital, and it was a triumphal entry with people laying their clothes down on the street so Jesus could come in over them. And suddenly this little secret movement became, we are going to change the world. The world will never be the same. This man is going to change the entire world. 9 days later, he is given a public execution as a criminal. They have to beg for his body, his wounded, macerated, desecrated, defiled body. And it really is like those torture photographs of just wounded, deeply hurt, bruised, broken flesh, drenched in its own blood and covered with welts and sores and broken limbs. And Bach treats that so specifically. Bach treats the broken limbs and has the chorus sing to the broken limbs. They got this body and they said, okay, we're going to bury it. And they tried to bury it with love because the body was brutalized. And they put the last dirt on the grave. And they sit there and just are weeping, sitting on the ground weeping. And they don't know what to do next because the entire movement has just simply been completely eliminated. And everything they hope for in their own lives and for the world is finished and destroyed. And Bach has this group of people sit on the ground around the grave, and he takes two approaches to grieving. You know, one part of grieving is that you can't stop talking about something. You can't control the emotion, and it just goes out of control. You just end up going on and on and on and on, and it doesn't let you go, and it just takes over. It takes over completely. And you don't know what to do about it because the grief is so much bigger than you are. You can't contain it. You can't manage it. You're just overwhelmed. And then another side of grieving is you're so hurt, you're so angry, and you're so broken that you shut yourself off and you won't even speak to people. And you're silent. And you just turn off everything and everyone. And so chorus 1 is the long lines that just can't get a hold of themselves. They just keep going on, and just when the line should stop, they choke and keep going and keep going and keep going, and it's a sobbing that can't stop, doesn't know how to stop. And they sing to the chorus 2, please help me grieve. And chorus 2 says, what? How? Where? Bitter, closed off, shut down, angry, hurt. Totally non-communicative. And Bach presents you with these two incredible images of what grief does to you. And then, of course, Bach sets them in dialogue. And while they're trying to talk to each other, of course, as always, the kids get it when the adults don't get anything. The adults are paralyzed. And the kids start singing. Jesus is there. He's patient. The adults are so upset about what's happening in the moment. And the kids say, Jesus is patient. He's patient. And chorus 1 hears the word patience. It says, oh, right, see, patience. Patience, what's that? And then the kids, again, take you upwards to this incredible vision. And then the chorus 1 says, oh, right, see. And they sing the word see, from this place where they're totally blind. And the word see, suddenly Bach makes the word see just flower into this incredible open gesture of liberation, renewal, and opening a completely new space. And then the chorus 1 and chorus 2 go into intense dialogue. And chorus 1 says to chorus 2, see. Chorus 2 says, what? Just what? And it's so aggressive. I mean, it's just like, and the music, the orchestra turns into, what Simon says, Dornenkrone. I mean, really just the crown of thorns. It's this spiky, angry music. And chorus 1 says, see our guilt. What? As human beings, we are so sure that we are the objects of injustice and that all these horrible people have done things that are ruining our lives. And we never ask, well, what did we do? And Bach at this moment says, no, excuse me, I don't want to talk about the Romans. I don't want to talk about the Jews. I don't want to talk about, I want to look at us. What did we do that this happened? And just when you want to feel self-righteous and hurt and be the victim forever, no, look at yourself. And then there's this incredible musical passage where chorus 2 starts to sing an actual musical line instead of one syllable. And they help chorus 1 carry the cross up a hill and say, we can't do it alone. We don't have enough courage. We can help each other. And then who helps lift it but the kids? Who just lift the whole thing up and just say, actually, you're not carrying that cross, Jesus is, so just calm down. And so all I did was say to the chorus, okay, try that.
Well, you can imagine, after a week of looking at, and that's just number 1. Okay, remember, depending how you count it.
The show open now.
That's right. There's then the next 79 numbers. And of course, can you imagine the privilege for us of looking at the music like this and thinking about it, and being required to go into this level of depth and to look into ourselves in this way, and the players similarly. I should probably say that, and Peter may correct me, Jane is absolutely right to say that it is staged, but we never really set out to stage it. That's sort of what happened in the end. What we set out to do was sort of, well, look, I belong to a generation, I think we're the same age. When I was at primary school, we did something called music and movement in the mornings. Someone would play something on the piano, and we would express ourselves to it. And it was just great. And I'm very sorry for future generations who weren't allowed to do that. The thing about this is what we tried to do was we tried to find the shape of the music. And if you like, a production grew out of it. But also, so much as you will see when you see it, and for those of you who can't see it, of course, it is on the digital concert hall of the Berlin Philharmonic, so you do have the great privilege of being able to watch it online. And also, I don't belong to the organisation, so I can say you can also buy it on DVD on their new label. But the extraordinary thing about this is that we then looked at the shape of every piece, all the conversations that were taking place, and all the listening that was taking place, and created the shape of the music accordingly. And when you come to see it, I think you will see that Peter doesn't do anything that isn't just apparently really the music brought to life. I would like to describe it as, in a way, it's so simple that that's in a way all we do. But as we've lived with it over the years, the level of deepness and the different varieties of response to it. Because you see, there are 63 people in the chorus, and there must be about 50 in the orchestra, and 10 soloists or so, and 25 kids. There are a lot of people on stage. And everywhere we've gone, we've been able to go into it deeper and deeper and deeper. And one of the great joys here has been to pick up with the boys of St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, who have been spectacular. Not only do they sing gloriously, but we've never come across a set of kids who were so responsive, so that Peter would ask them to do something, and normally we have to do it 2 or 3 times and explain it. Actually, on this occasion, we would have to do it and then bring them back down again, because they'd done it so extraordinarily the first time. We even cancelled their second day of rehearsals. So it's been just such a privilege to work with these extraordinary boys as well, hasn't it?
Can I just interject, which is, I just like to make the observation that as an audience member, that everything they're describing in terms of what the chorus went through, in terms of individual responses, is exactly what the audience goes through as well. In other words, what's extraordinary about this presentation is that each audience member is going through the exact same journey that the chorus went through in terms of going deeper and deeper and deeper into the material. I mean, it is remarkable how what is happening with the chorus and the orchestra is absolutely translated or transmitted to each individual audience member in the same way. In terms of, I would suggest that audience members who connect with this production, each audience member is having a deeply personal experience with the material.
Well, and the hope is it's not staged at all. I mean, it's not theater. It's a ritual, and Bach is working in images. And the same way Grunewald, you know, in the Eisenheim altarpiece, is showing you images of the crucifixion that are layered on top of each other. And as you know, the Eisenheim altarpiece is meant to be opened and closed at certain times of day while music is being played, because it's also meant to be a healing experience. And it's in a hospital. And that's, I think, the most important thing to remember about Bach is one of the things that our generation grew up with that was a little unhelpful was from Glenn Gould, that this is intellectual music. And yes, it's intellectual, but in fact, it's primarily physical. It's of the body. It's like the painting of Grunewald. It's profoundly in the flesh. It's meant to affect your body. It's meant to affect how you behave and how you live and what life choices you make. It's not meant to be thought about. It's meant to be experienced. And we had a generation where Bach was untouchable. And it was just this cerebral experience, and you just stayed back and you contemplated it. And I grew up at Emmanuel Church in Boston, where they performed a Bach cantata every Sunday in the liturgy. And when you were at Emmanuel Music in the 80s, there was a Salvadoran refugee safe house. There was a shelter for battered women. There was a kitchen for homeless people. There were all these programs going on while we're rehearsing a Bach cantata. And literally every week, you're trying to convince someone not to commit suicide. Every Bach cantata is a 12-step program that tries to address the very crisis you have and musically untangle it. And this is not music for contemplation, it's music for action. These are the things you have to change in your life, and you have to start with this. And it's just like losing your drug habit. These are concrete things you have to do. You can't just sit there and think of them. And Bach's music is so unbelievably physical, the way it describes the scourging of Jesus and then the blood dripping down his back through the lacerated wounds. And Bach is giving you just such unbelievably vivid, very precise images. So inviting people to put their body where their belief system is really the project. It's not about staging. It's about, we can all think nice thoughts. Now can you live them? Put those nice thoughts in your actual body.
And thereby taking away the scores. So many of the choir is singing, and all the singers are obviously off book, but actually many of the players are as well. So the arias are done off book, and you get these extraordinary that just deepen with every time we repeat it.
There's a little story about changing the culture of the Berlin Philharmonic, because as you know, they have a reason to be a little self-impressed. They simply are the greatest orchestra in the world, period. And they know that, and they don't have to worry about it. They know that before breakfast every morning. So, but like all orchestra musicians, they're playing from a score. And my proposal to them was that all the solo players, instrumentalists, have to memorize the music. And that was not greeted favorably. this was irritating because they also are insanely busy. I mean, as you know, the Berlin Philharmonic players, they have a wind group, they have the cellos, the tour, they're always doing a million things. Their daily schedules are overwhelming. So memorizing this music, and as you know, memorizing Bach is not easy because no melody goes for 8 bars. Every melody goes on and on and on, and every time it comes back, it changes and shifts because Bach is showing you what it means to ask a question that doesn't have a short answer. It has a long, complicated, involved answer. And in fact, when you interrogate that, you have to go back to the beginning and start over. And it's music of searching. It's music of exploring. It's music of not being satisfied with an answer. It's music of continuing to look, continuing to inquire, continuing to ask, continuing to reach beyond where you are. So these melodies are treacherous because, and memorizing them, like which repeat are we in and which, it's terrifying. I don't want to say the musicians were lazy. I'm going to say it's terrifying to memorize this music. And they did. And something astonishing happened when they stopped looking at music paper. Step 1, the bar lines vanished. And Bach is no longer about this regular. And suddenly it's about the actual melodic line taking its journey. But more than that, it's if you're looking at the singer who you're accompanying, you're no longer the accompanist. You are in an equal dialogue. And what they're singing back to you notes you're playing. You just played, and then they sing those notes back to you, and then you offer them back, and it turns out what's going on is an exchange. Not, we're going to meet at the end of bar 4. But this open-ended exchange. And so what happens is the music opens to this huge horizon. And the musicians had such a profound experience and became deep. I mean, they're so devoted to what they're doing. And they play with a conviction and an insight that's quite incredible. Maybe I'll just give you a quick example of what, again, why I say it's not staged, but it's, as Simon would say, it's visualized and it's ritualized. The most famous number from the Matthew Passion that, we all know and, put on repeat play on really bad days, Erbarme dich, that aria that asks for mercy with a violin solo after Peter has denied Jesus 3 times. Sung by the mezzo, in this case, the amazing Magdalena Kojena. Magdalena has this thrilling musicality, but also this truly disruptive energy. All the critics say that's just too much. And that's also what Jesus' disciples said. Mary Magdalene was too much. And Magdalena Kojena does that brilliantly. Everyone says, no, this is crossing a line that is absolutely incorrect. And that's what all of Jesus' friends said. And Jesus said, no, I want her right here. And when my story is told, they're going to talk about her. And her behavior is incorrect. Well, Bach gave the largest number of arias to her. So Bach gives you the Passion of Jesus through the eyes of Mary Magdalene, this difficult person, this person who doesn't behave correctly, who interrupts everything, has way too much emotion, way too much feeling, cannot be presented in polite society. And Jesus says, yes, her, I want her right here. Bach wants her right here. She sings Erbarme dich on behalf of Peter. because Peter can't say anything. And it's this famous violin melody that we all know. And of course, as soon as she's actually singing it to the violinist, and the violinist is actually playing the violin solo to her as she sings, you realize it is the act of forgiving someone. What does it take to find it within yourself to forgive someone who's asking to be forgiven? And the reason we're so moved by that piece of music is it reaches deep into that deepest thing in any of our lives, is how do you forgive someone? You can't bring yourself to do it. You have to bring yourself to do it. Not just halfway. Completely. That's why the melody is so long. And Bach follows that by the account of Judas committing suicide. And there's someone who asks for forgiveness and is told, burn in hell forever. In the Matthew Passion, Bach expresses this overwhelming compassion for Judas. Judas is the one who makes a sacrifice. Judas is the one who betrays what he loves. And Judas, his sacrifice was needed, or there would be no crucifixion. And Jesus is inconsolable about Judas. And the Matthew Passion has this incredible section devoted to Judas with unbelievable tenderness. And then when Judas commits suicide, Bach follows another aria of a singer singing to a solo violin. Judas says, give me back my Jesus. Here's the money. I'm throwing it at your feet. Please just give me back Jesus. And the violin solo is vicious, savage, cutting, interrupts the singer, cuts him off, says, shut up, shut up, shut up. I'm not going to hear you. I don't care what you think. Just go kill yourself. And Bach puts right next to each other in the heart of the Matthew Passion one human being who is forgiven and one human being who is not forgiven. The solo violinist and leader of Orchestra 1 plays the music of forgiveness. The leader of Orchestra 2 plays the music of I'm damning you and cursing you to hell forever, and I will never forgive you. And he puts these two arias right next to each other. So, in concert that can go by, but when you actually see the experience of people trying to really engage with each other, trying to speak to the violinist, and the violinist absolutely answering with this rage, the piece begins to, you can begin to touch and taste its dimensionality. And that's really just what we're trying to do, because Bach's music is so pictorial. And as Simon has said, that it's helpful when musicians can think in images, because Bach's music is actually painting a picture. And then when the audience begins to see the relationships just physically in space, and what I want to say, and what the Berlin Radio Choir is so magnificent about, and one of the things I hate about the Passion story in the Bible is the invention of the Jews. Because, clearly it's a later interpolation, most scholars now realize. Because once Christianity became the religion of Rome, it couldn't be the Romans who killed Jesus. So the Jews had to be invented. Pilate is a perfectly nice guy who said, I love that guy, Jesus, and I actually put him up for the country club. I want him in our country club, and I voted him. And then these evil Jews are blackballing him, and the Jews are foaming at the mouth and calling for the crucifixion of Jesus. And meanwhile, Pilate is saying, I think he's a really nice guy, and I don't have a problem at all. The self-exculpation of the Romans, by the invention of the slavering Jews, it's disturbing. And Bach goes to this incredible place because the music for the Jews is blood-curdling. When they scream, "Crucify him," it is blood-curdling. But then Bach does something astonishing. There is a chorus of, when after Jesus has been sentenced and they're beating him to death, and he's blind because his eyes are just filled with blood and his eyelid no longer opens and his face is caked with blood. And they scream at him, "Prophesy, prophesy, who just hit you? Who just hit you? Jesus Christ, go ahead, prophesy. Who just hit you?" And it's music of unbelievable violence and glee. Savage joy. The joy of knowing you're hurting another person and they're helpless and you are supreme. Prophesy. Who just hit you? And then suddenly Bach switches register and the entire chorus says, "Who just hit you? I just hit you." Every time I sinned, I struck you. I just hit you again this morning. I just hit you again this afternoon. This is not something that Jewish people did 2,000 years ago. This is something I did this morning. All over again. And that I do every day is I hurt you again and again and again with all of my stupid, weak gestures. And by everybody stepping up and taking responsibility, again, Bach will not allow a culture of victims, and he will not allow a culture of blame. Is we all have to stand where we really stand and look at where we are in relation to the big picture and to our own picture. And this chorus is so beautiful because they give you the terror and wildness of the violence, and they give you the depth of conscience immediately following it. And the unbelievable beauty of the honesty of their sound. This is a choral sound, I have to say, you just don't hear anywhere else in the world. This is a very special chorus. They're right now being defunded by the state of Germany, and they're paid $11,000 less than any other musical organization in Germany right now. But this East German sound is so humble, is so quietly warm, is so not aggressive. This beautiful, tender melancholy that's inside the sound of this chorus is so rare and beautiful, and we're used to award-winning. And this is humane, personal, honest, deeply warm sound. Living, breathing sound. And I think that this particular sense that people are singing with intelligence and feeling. And the sound isn't this hard-edged, but it has all of the richness and delicacy of all the different voices. Blending, listening to each other, but also feeling differently. Simon is, understating one thing only, which is how deeply Simon Rattle and I disagreed on each of these chorales. Literally, I would ask the chorus to do something, and Simon would come and ask for the opposite. And it was just a nightmare. And it goes on every night. And what's beautiful is Simon also now contradicts himself. And however he did it yesterday, he does it another way tonight. And so every night, the chorus is on the edge of anything they can be on the edge of. Not knowing what Simon's going to ask for. And meanwhile, having the temperature that's around them shifting. And having to find where they stand, literally and figuratively, in the middle of all this. And Simon's insistence is that these chorales not be formulaic, not be rote. He doesn't conduct any two chorales the same way. So every one of them is completely newly articulated every night. And they become this moment of conscience, this moment of trying to find an answer. And the beauty of the chorus is they can hold this incredible range of meaning. And that's why it doesn't sound like a message from our sponsor. And it's not that we're indoctrinating anyone, but we're actually just doing what any human being would do, is sharing the deepest things that you feel, but you don't have answers for. And again, the only possible thing you can do is go find someone to talk to. And Bach says we all need someone to talk to, and the genius is the solo arias are this idea that when you think you're alone, you're at your most alone. And each of the solo arias happens at this most alone moment. It turns out when you think you're alone, there's an oboe player. When you think that you're alone, there's a flute. You're not alone at all. You're actually always accompanied on every journey in your life. And you just have to listen more deeply and realize how not alone you are at all. And that we've all been given companions on this long, intricate, twisting, strange journey. And the journey of our lives, like these long Bach arias, which go on for 12 minutes, repeats. The thing that happened to you in elementary school happened to you again in middle school, and happened again in high school, and happened again in college, and is happening again every 5 years in your life. Our lives have these patterns, and we keep coming up against the same question. The same crisis in our life keeps happening over and over again. And so this music of repetition is both, first of all, the meaning of prayer, which is you repeat something until you begin to understand it. And in order to make sure that happens, these repetitions have been put in your life until you begin to gradually understand why this keeps coming back in your life. And those are the larger shapes of the piece. And again, they're not theatrical. It's not about staging. It's about recognizing these are the shapes of our lives. This is what it means to pray. This is what it means to search. This is what it means to open yourself in the face of what you cannot understand. And that's, I think, the power of this music and why the music surges forward. I'll just say one last anecdote. If you can just imagine this, when Bach performed it for the first time, not only was it not welcomed, it was actively despised. And Bach knew that he had written the greatest thing in the history of music. And after the second performance, he never performed it again for the next 25 years. What he did was made for himself a beautifully calligraphed copy. He copied the entire thing out on beautiful paper in 2 colors of ink, exquisitely calligraphed, and then put it on the shelf above his desk for the next 25 years. The music did not speak till the 3rd decade of the next century. The piece was silent for 80 years. When it spoke again, it was the Romantic era on the way to the Victorian era. So the piece was heard in the context of Victorian Christianity. These giant statements of official behavior. Then the early instrument movement said, oh, it should all dance. But a bunch of that also trivialized it. And so the music was distorted in both directions, made into a giant Victorian full bath of official behavior, or made a little silly or inconsequential. Simon Rattle is conducting a performance like we've never heard in history, where he's taken the insights of the early music movement. He's banished from the Berlin Philharmonic every 19th century gesture. The music does dance, but also when you want to reach for that deep, deep sound that comes from the marrow of your bones and vibrates through your whole being, he has the Berlin Philharmonic and the Berlin Radio Choir. And suddenly this overwhelmingly powerful sound comes from some deep, deep place. It dances, but it also soars.
Thank you, Peter. Do you have anything that we were going to try to take some questions?
Oh, yes. Sure, sorry.
Can I just say also something else about the Berlin Radio Choir, since Simon was promoting the DVD of the St. Matthew Passion. We also have the Berlin Radio Choir in a concert next Friday night at the Rachmaninoff Vespers. It also is sold out, but I thought I would mention it. So any questions?
The Berlin Philharmonic has a very special relationship with Simon Rattle, which is, I've just come from the rehearsal of the Schumann Third and Fourth Symphonies this morning. Now, they've played those for years, and this morning they took them all apart from scratch. That's what they do every day. And they say, it's why we're alive another day on Earth, is to do something you didn't do yesterday, and to think something you didn't think yesterday. You're given another day to have another thought, to have something you haven't done yet. And that's how the Berlin Philharmonic rehearses. And how this man works with the chorus is just unbelievable. They are alive to every nuance every night. And so, literally things we've set so deeply, you just totally upset so profoundly Sunday afternoon two of my favorite choruses, that we really worked hard to find a shape for them, and he destroyed them at the rehearsal on Sunday afternoon. And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. but that is how we work, is that if it calcifies, if it becomes too authoritative, it has lost its spirit of inquiry and spirit of searching, and something is no longer open about people's attitudes. And I think that's the beautiful way of the way this man rehearses, is part of all of our lives is, you don't know your next conversation. You don't know what's about to happen to you next. You have to take everything you've ever thought in your life and put it into whatever you're going to do next. But you have no idea what that's going to be. And you have to still be you with whoever you meet. But each new person you meet is also going to be someone who changes you. And so it's that marvelous thing of you know who you are, but that only equips you to stay open and change and engage with the next set of experiences you have.
Can you imagine my problem with this is I'm not quite sure whether he thinks it was a good rehearsal yesterday or he just thinks we're all plain incompetent.
The rehearsal was shocking because Simon took a couple of things that both Simon and I have really worked hard on to get. It's the High Priest chorus, and they're really scary choruses, and all of the violence of the world. You have to feel the violence and weight of injustice of the world, right? That every day there's so much injustice you can't even believe it. Particularly these days in America, just you're in the face of so much injustice. How do you even start? And Bach creates this cumulative sound of injustice, layer after layer, and these fugal, extravagant fugal gestures of mass incompetence and injustice. And Simon got the sound to be light, transparent, and had them not sing too loud.
But I'm sure you can all imagine why. Because as we endlessly re-explore the pieces, we have to keep on cleaning the picture. And so that is all that anger and so on will come in the moment of the performance. But also I want them to sing beautifully in tune, beautifully blended. I want there to be a duh on the end of that word. I don't want too much tenor in choir one and so on. So we all have different jobs. So we're all trying to get to the same place, but always getting there in
It's
a
a composite
variety of ways.
reality, which is what makes it reality. Because reality is composite. And the more composite the performance is, the more it's touching the real world. And so the more the chorus has input from all these directions. So that's why I didn't stop you, because I knew you were ruining it. But I also know that, like the crucifixion, until the ruination happens, there's no resurrection. And so it has to be ruined to be reborn. So fine. but also it has to remain fresh. And as soon as they've gotten into anything that feels like routine, it has to actually be made to live again in some new way, and they have to rethink and refeel what they're doing and listen all over again in some new way to each other. And so it was super liberating. But that's what rehearsal is, and we don't stop. I mean, it just keeps going. And I also just turned around a bunch of things, just said they have to be different. And there are some things that have to be different because we truly haven't found them. They're really dangerous. I'll just mention one, which is after the crowd screams to crucify Jesus, Pilate says, okay, you people are responsible. And Bach sets the line in the Bible for the Jews. His blood comes over us and our children. And of course, the idea that Jesus came to offer all human beings forgiveness and love. And that the death of Jesus is the excuse for century after century of pogroms. And I do this very intense thing I ask the chorus to do with Simon, but this has been a struggle from day one. Normally the piece is just another kind of grinding, quick, nasty, rasping chorus.
Normally goes, Sein Blut kommen über uns and so on, at about that sort of speed.
And then now it is,
Sein Blut kommen. It's about half speed, and instead of being very cross and loud, it's extremely quiet, and all the vibrato and everything is being taken out. And of course, that's where all of musical history begins to meet, and what Simon Rattle has called it, if you like, a sort of third way. Because we do all know that our early music friends are correct in so very many things. And so it is that thing of knowing when to take the colour away, or just go very keeningly in after the dissonance, or whatever it is.
and so this furious chorus becomes a lament. And when it's played this slowly, this little minute, 10-second chorus starts to last forever. And you realize the centuries are going by. And
There's one very important thing to remind everybody. There is all these numbers. There is no direction from Bach in what you're supposed to do. There are just notes. It doesn't say fast, slow. It doesn't say loud, quick. You've actually just got to work it out for yourself.
And so then I also have at the same moment Jesus in his prison cell, pacing like a maniac. that his death will be used as the excuse for mass murder. And inconsolable. And so it creates a set of really challenging experiences out of a piece of music that is not done speaking. And every time we look at this, we listen to this, we keep trying to adjust the tempo. We keep trying to find what's in there, but also what's in us. What do we have to acknowledge about those words and those consequences? And okay, Bach wrote something, but this goes beyond Bach's intention. What it means to have a pogrom of Jews in 1750 and now is different. And so we have to also perform this music in a way it wasn't performed before. It's not about historical authenticity, it's about who we are as human beings. Now, in our generation, and what do we pass on to our children? Which is what culture actually is. And that's what we're engaged in every day.
That seems like a perfect concluding remark to me. Thank you all for coming. You are in for an extraordinary experience. I'm sure you're now, if you weren't aware of it before, I think now you probably are. And thank you to Peter and Simon. They're in the middle of a lot of hard work, so I thank them for taking the time today. Thank you, thank you.
Yes.